Hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker Shop Update for February 10th, 2017. I'm Shannon Rogers and here's what's happening in my shop this week. I have been planing this blanket chest case and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but as you may or may not know, last week I ran the first live version of one of these shop updates. And it went pretty well. You know, we cut some wedge tendons or tusk tendons, whatever you want to call them, but I had some real audio issues and I am really struggling with some of the technical issues of getting these live broadcasts right. The camera angles look great, the multiple cameras are working great, but for the life of me, I cannot seem to cut the static out of the broadcast, nor is my video capture device or my HDMI capture device seeming to be capturing the actual lapel mic. It seems to be picking up the external mic. So the only reason I bring this up has nothing to do with woodworking, but there's a lot of people out there watching this. If any of you have any idea, have any experience with this type of stuff and can let me know what could possibly be the problem, it would certainly benefit everybody, because obviously as you're listening to this audio right now, you know this lapel mic works. It does a good job, but for some reason on that live broadcast, it's either not working or there's just too much other crap in the way and it just ruins the entire presentation. So I'd hate for hopefully good quality woodworking content to be, overshadowed by just crappy technical gremlins getting in the way. So I really would appreciate any input anybody has. So let's get to this case. Here's this blanket chest that I've been working on for seemingly forever, just kind of in between things. I was just getting ready to miter and install this astragal molding. And literally I had the saw out and had marked my miters and was about to make that first cut when it suddenly occurred to me, I had better come in here and smooth plane this surface. Needed to flush up the dovetails, make sure all the glue was removed, make sure obviously that everything was nice and flush and flat so that first of all, I could get a good joint mate between the flat back of the molding and hopefully the flat side of the case. But it also occurred to me that once this astragal molding was in place, it'd be really difficult to access the side and do any of the finish prep, the smooth planing that I'm going to need to do. So I dodged a bullet and stopped what I was doing, set the molding aside, grabbed a smoothing plane to start cleaning up the case. So it's one of those things to keep in mind. Finish prep is one thing, and we tend to think, okay, finish is the last step I'm going to do. So finish step is the step right before that. The penultimate step of a project, right, is preparing for finish. Well, not always, and you got to be careful. Sometimes pre-finishing is great. So you want to obviously smooth plane or sand, however you're going to do it, before you apply the finish then, before you're even going to glue anything together. So you may need to protect your joints so the glue doesn't, or excuse me, the finish doesn't interfere with the glue. In this particular case, my case is all glued up and I was just about to add the moldings. So you could see sometimes that pre-finishing, that finish prep may occur in places in the build that you might throw you off your guard a little bit. So just be wary of that. But the other thing that always comes to mind when you're having to deal with an assembled project like this and smooth planing it, it can get, how do I hold it? How do I secure it so it's not sliding all over the place? So I wanted to show you what I do. First of all, I've got just a big hunk of 8/4 material down here, this walnut, and I've got a bench dog raised up here so that the walnut is pressed up against that, and then I took a hold fast and just kind of locked it in place so that this can't pivot or rotate on me. So that's my primary stop that the case is riding up against. The other thing is I don't want it to slide around on me too much. So this was something that was kind of an accident. I was doing a demonstration on resawing by hand, and I just sawed out this little piece of cherry, resawed it down, and then just cross-cut it out, and I ended up with this like bench hook looking thing, which actually I've ended up using as an iPad holder in the past too. But it's an incredible work holding device for a case like this. I can take this rabbet, put it down so the rabbet is flush up against the front of the case, and then when I come in here with a hold fast, and lock that down, not only does it provide a stop that the case can slide up against, but this is cantilevered out over top of it, and it's like a hold down clamp on like a drill press or something like that. Its cam action is holding things down. Now there's every possibility that it might ding up the inside edge of this, but I'm not terribly worried about that because I'm going to come back and be breaking that edge anyway. So this is, I mean, you could obviously create multiple of these little jigs that have different depths on them so they don't mar your work, but I actually like that it's contacting here because it's really, really stable now, but yet I'm not actually clamping anything down. And what this will allow me to do is come over here on this side and I can do my smooth plane work. And the case is not clamped firmly in place, so if necessary, I can move it around without having to unclamp a bunch of stuff. But it's also firmly attached to the bench because I've got positive stops right where I need it. Now, another thing you can do when you need to plane a case like this is you can certainly come in and just clamp it down to your bench top, if that's possible. See, in this particular instance, I've got access to the lower drawer compartment, so I can clamp to the rail and hold it in place. But if this were a solid bottom, I would have no option but to run a clamp all the way across, and then it would get in the way of the planing I have to do. But at the same time, I find that clamps, they slip. And the more you tighten those clamps, the more you possibly could deform the case, which is going to throw off your ability to smooth plane it. So it's always better to have some sort of stop to ride against. And actually, if you want, if you're worried about, say, the pressure on the top, the force on the top, maybe tweaking the case a little, you can create a taller stop to give more support higher up the case. In this particular instance, we're talking about a heck of a lot of dovetails. This case is very, very rigid. I'm not terribly worried about that. The other thing to think about, though, I mentioned earlier about being prepared to finish kind of at any point in the project. This has bracket feet on it that fit in, it's the wrong foot, that fit in a little proud of the case. Well, if this is set proud of the case, well, I can't get to this corner very well. So it's always a good idea to plan for that, and these feet are removable. They're just screwed in place, and for that matter, they're designed that way because this is the part that usually gets broken on a chest like this. So being able to take it off, build a new part, screw it back in place is always really, really helpful. But again, because I can just pop these off with screws, I can come in here with my smooth plane and get right to that edge to clean the whole thing up. So that is the long edge. What happens when I want to move it and work on the short edge? That's a slightly different problem now. I guess I could stand on a stool and plane this, but I need to come up with a better solution. Now, the first thing is, if your case is long enough, you could actually just set it on the floor. And in that particular instance, again, you want it against something firm. So I could actually run it right up against my leg vise or clamp a board in place, clamp a board to my bench itself that I could run it against. But in this particular instance, the case is too short and I'm gonna end up working below my bench top. So here, I'm just gonna take my saw bench or any object you've got floating around the shop. I'm gonna run it up against my leg vise. So again, it's got something to press against. Bring the case down, set it on top of the saw bench. And I want to do the same thing I was doing before, where I've got a physical stop to ride against. So I'm going to slide this board giving an extra point of contact, and the case can slide right up against that. Now I can grab my smoothing plane and I can work along the top here to smooth this out. If it's rocking on you or moving around, you can grab a clamp now and run it all the way across your bench. And you're going to need a longer clamp, but honestly, a 48-inch clamp will make that work. And then you can press it up against the bench to hold it in place. Another thing that I found that works really well is actually setting the case against the bench itself, using the entire bench as your stop. I would probably want to do it on the far end, but just so that I'm not moving cameras around too much. I press it up against the bench and using the entire mass of the bench as my stop and planing that way. Now I need to remove that leg, it's rocking at this point. But this offers you a very steady object. In my case, my bench is probably 300, it's probably closer to 500 pounds. But again, you can clamp it in place all you want. Inevitably, those clamps are going to shift. So have some sort of stop that you can work against. Another thing I can actually do is run another stop inside the case itself. So I've got that same cantilevered block that I was using. Grab a bigger one. Now I've got another block. Not only is it a stop here, but I've got another stop back here to prevent it from shifting even more. And that's really all you need. Inevitably, the case may shift around on you a little bit, but you ultimately just want a good stable surface that you can smooth plane that out. So there's lots of different ways to tackle this. Ultimately, it all comes down to having a solid stop instead of relying upon clamps, because inevitably, I think those clamps end up exerting more pressure on the case than just working up against an immovable object. Definitely something we're all going to encounter in every single project. And just remember, don't forget, pre-finishing may happen in some weird places in your project. So just keep a heads up, thinking before I attach something permanently, am I going to need to smooth plane that surface before I do? We'll see you next week, folks.